My mother stood in the middle of our kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, phone still glowing in her shaking hand, and told my father he had until Sunday to resign from the church where she was filing for divorce. 26 years of marriage, and she put on a countdown clock like a bomb in a movie. And the wildest part? None of it. Not the screaming, not the ultimatum, not my little brother rocking back and forth on the couch whispering that our mother was a demon. None of it started with anything my father did. It started with a job posting. A single opening at a high school. To understand how a job listing burned my family down to the studs, I have to take you back. Way back. My name is Hannah. I'm 21 years old, and I've spent most of those 21 years trying to answer a question I still can't answer today. Is my mother sick, or is she just cruel? I've asked therapists. I've asked my father. I've asked myself at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, listening to her slam cabinet doors downstairs because someone, somewhere, had failed to worship her properly that day. Some people in my life say she's mentally ill and deserves compassion. Others say illness doesn't write the kind of script she writes, doesn't aim the way she aims. The truth is probably tangled somewhere in the middle, and I've made a kind of uneasy peace with never fully untangling it. But I want you to understand who she is before I tell you what she did, because without the history, the ending won't hit you the way it hit us. My mother is 47 years old, and she teaches 9th grade English at the local high school. On her good days, and she has good days, that's the confusing part, she is warm and funny and generous. She'll bake for the neighbors. She'll stay up late helping a struggling student's parent understand an essay rubric. She'll hug me and tell me she's proud of me. And for a few hours, I'll let myself believe that this version of her is the real one, and everything else was a bad dream. And then the switch flips. There's no warning. There's no trigger you can learn to avoid. Believe me, I spent my entire childhood trying to map the minefield. One day, she's herself. And the next day, she's a stranger wearing my mother's face, and everything in her orbit becomes fuel. When the switch flips, she gets dangerous. Not dramatic dangerous. Actually dangerous. She'll take the car out and drive 90 miles an hour on back roads. And if you say anything, she'll speed up. She's moved out of our house twice with no warning. Just packed a suitcase and rented an apartment across town. Then came back weeks later like nothing happened, daring anyone to mention it. She shoplifted. She's come home with the smell of wine on her breath after driving. She started intense, secretive friendships with strangers that flared and died within months. She once bought an entire greenhouse, a full backyard greenhouse, glass panels and all. Used it twice and let it fill with dead leaves. She buys complete book series, 10 and 12 volumes at a time, reads half of the first book and shelves them. And then she turns around and screams at me for spending my own money I earned, on a birthday present for my boyfriend. That's my mother. The rules exist for everyone else. But if I had to pick one story to make you understand her, one story that captures the whole machine, it's the doctorate. When I was 11 years old, my mother decided, in the middle of one of her episodes, that teaching high school was beneath her and that she was destined to be a college professor. So she enrolled in a doctoral program. And then she made my older sister Bethany and me write her assignments. I want you to sit with that for a second. I was 11. Bethany was 13. We were children, and we spent our evenings and weekends drafting graduate-level papers on educational theory for our mother while she watched television downstairs. I remember hunching over the family computer as 6th grader, Googling what words like pedagogy and qualitative methodology meant so I could fake my way through a literature review. I remember Bethany crying at the kitchen table over a 20-page final that was due at midnight, and Mom leaning in the doorway telling her to stop being dramatic, that she'd had it easy her whole life, and this was the least she could do. Here's the part that still makes me laugh in that hollow way you laugh when the alternative is screaming. We did it. 2 kids ghost wrote our mother through an entire doctoral program. She walked across the stage in a velvet tam, and everyone clapped, and she framed the diploma and hung it in the hallway. Doctor. And then, degree in hand, she decided she didn't actually want to be a professor after all. Just like the greenhouse. Just like the book series. The mountain was only interesting while other people were carrying her up it. She kept the title, though. Oh, she kept the title. She corrects people at parent-teacher conferences. It's doctor, actually. Every time I hear it, I think about being 11 years old and learning to fake footnotes. And when I say she can be cruel, I don't mean sharp-tongued. I mean she has hit me. I mean she has looked at me, her own daughter, and told me she wished I was dead. She said it the way you tell someone the weather. She has mocked every dream I've ever been brave enough to say out loud in that house. When I wanted to study nursing, she laughed and said I didn't have a stomach for it. When I brought home friends, she'd find their softest spot within an hour and press on it. Then tell me afterward what was wrong with each of them, why they were beneath us, why they'd abandon me eventually. When I started dating Tyler, the kindest, most patient person I have ever known, she referred to him exclusively as that boy for a year and once told me, in front of him, that I could do better if I lost some weight. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder at 19. My therapist didn't even look surprised when I described my childhood. I'm still climbing out of that pit, one handhold at a time. And the worst symptom isn't the sadness. It's the vigilance. Even when mom is warm, especially when she's warm, I am watching her hands, her eyes, the corners of her mouth, waiting for the switch. You never relax in a house with a trapdoor floor. One more thing you need to know about her, because it's the gear that turns this whole story. My mother cannot keep a friend for longer than a year. I've watched the cycle so many times I could set it to music. Act 1. She meets someone new and they're the most wonderful person alive, a soulmate, finally someone who understands her. Act 2. Small grievances start to accumulate. This friend didn't call back fast enough, didn't compliment her new haircut, laughed at someone else's joke a little too hard. Act 3. The friend is declared an enemy, a snake, a jealous nobody, and is cut off with surgical finality. Blocked, deleted, denounced at the dinner table. And at her school, the cycle runs on the staff. She emails the administration constantly, to complain about colleagues who weren't sufficiently nice to her. A teacher who didn't save her a seat at a staff meeting. A secretary whose tone she didn't like. 8 years of that. Remember that. 8 years of the principal's inbox filling up with my mother's grievances. That detail is a loaded gun on the wall, and I promise you it goes off. Now let me tell you about Mrs. Prescott. While I was in 9th grade, I didn't have my mother as a teacher. Thank God. The school had the basic decency to never put me in her class. Instead, I was placed in honors English with Mrs. Eleanor Prescott, and I'm not exaggerating when I say she changed my life. She was in her early 60s then, silver-haired, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a voice like a warm radio station. Her classroom smelled like paper and peppermint. She had this way of making you feel like your thoughts about a book were discoveries, like you'd found something no one had ever found before, even when 30 years of students had underlined the same passage. When my grandmother died that fall and I bombed a quiz, she didn't just extend my deadline. She sat with me at lunch and let me talk about my grandma for 45 minutes while she graded papers, nodding, asking questions, never once checking the clock. Mrs. Prescott is the reason I love reading. She handed me a battered copy of Great Expectations in October of my 9th grade year and said, "This one's about a kid who gets everything he thinks he wants and finds out it's poison. I think you'll like it." I read it in 4 days. It's still my favorite book. It's sitting on my nightstand right now, the same copy because she let me keep it, and I swear I didn't understand until this year. Until everything I'm about to tell you happened, how perfectly she'd aimed that book in my life. A story about wanting a station in life so badly you rot yourself hollow chasing it. She probably just thought a quiet, sad 14-year-old would connect with Pip. But looking back, it feels like prophecy. For a while, Mrs. Prescott and my mother were friends. They taught in the same department. Mom with the standard 9th graders, Mrs. Prescott with the honors kids. And for about a year, they carpooled to district trainings and traded books and sat together at basketball games. I remember being cautiously happy about it. The way you're happy when a stray dog lets you get close. Maybe this one would last. It didn't, of course. I never found out what Mrs. Prescott's crime was. Knowing the pattern, it was probably nothing, a canceled lunch, a compliment paid to the wrong person. All I know is that one evening my mother sat at our kitchen table, dialed Mrs. Prescott's number, and told her, calmly and completely, that she was a terrible person and that my mother would never speak to her again. Then she hung up, blocked the number, and poured herself a glass of iced tea like she'd just finished a chore. The collateral damage, as always, was mine to absorb. When I graduated high school, we threw a party in the backyard, and I asked, carefully, quietly, in my most neutral voice, if I could invite Mrs. Prescott. My mother looked at me like I'd suggested inviting a rat into the kitchen. Absolutely not. That woman was not welcome on our property. So the teacher who got me through ninth grade, through my grandmother's death, through the discovery that I actually loved something, was not allowed at my graduation party because my mother had unilaterally declared her an enemy of the state. Mrs. Prescott sent a card anyway. A beautiful card with a handwritten note about Pip and great expectations of her own for me, and $20 tucked inside. I cried reading it, and my mother, watching me cry, plucked the card off the counter, read it, snorted, and said, $20. She always was too cheap to buy anyone a real present. That's my mother in a single frame. She takes the kindest thing in the room and finds the angle from which it looks small. So now the stage is set, and here's where the story actually begins. This past spring, Mrs. Prescott announced her retirement. 30-plus years in the classroom, and she wanted to spend her mornings with her grandchildren instead of with hall duty. The school threw her a little reception with grocery store sheet cake. And just like that, an opening appeared on the schedule like a crack in the earth. Honors ninth grade English. Teacher needed for fall. You have to understand what that job meant to my mother. She has coveted the honors position since her very first year at that school. 9 years of wanting. And I mean coveted in the full biblical sense, which is going to become darkly funny later, given how much of this story runs through our church. At our dinner table for 9 years, we heard the sermon. If she only had honors kids instead of, her words, the usual riffraff, her genius would finally be visible. Her low test scores were the students' fault. Her classroom management problems were the students' fault. The honors kids were pre-sorted, pre-motivated, pre-polished. To her, that classroom wasn't a job. It was a throne, and she'd been waiting 9 years for it to be vacated. And so my mother did the single most my mother thing I have ever witnessed, which is saying something. The moment, and I mean the moment, Mrs. Prescott's retirement became official, my mother unblocked her number. 3 years of exile, erased with a tap of her thumb. Not because she missed her friend, not because she regretted the cruelty, but because Mrs. Prescott suddenly had something she wanted. She started calling her every single night. I'd walk past my parents' bedroom and hear through the door this bright, brittle performance voice she puts on, laughing too loudly, reminiscing about carpools and book swaps as if the severing phone call had never happened. As if she hadn't banned this woman from my graduation party. As if she hadn't mocked her handwriting on a card that made me cry. And the phone calls weren't even the bold part. Within 2 weeks, my mother was asking Mrs. Prescott to hand over her curriculum. All of it. Her unit plans, her reading lists, her pacing guides, 3 decades of craft, so that mom could start, quote, adapting it for my classroom next year. Her classroom. The job hadn't been posted for a month. No interview had happened. No decision had been made by any human being with the power to make one. But in my mother's head, the coronation was already over, and she was simply collecting the crown jewels early. She'd sit at the kitchen table with a legal pad, sketching out which novels she'd keep and which she'd cut, redesigning a syllabus for a position she did not have. And here's the detail that tells you everything about how these calls were landing on the other end. She kept complaining to us, genuinely baffled, that Mrs. Prescott was being cold on the phone. Distant. Guarded. She could not understand why. She stood in our kitchen, wounded, asking the air why Eleanor was acting so strange. And I had to physically leave the room, because the answer was so enormous, so blindingly obvious, that being near the question felt dangerous. My father and I tried. I want that on the record. We tried. Dad is 57, a quiet, steady man, a deacon at our church, the kind of person who absorbs my mother's weather systems the way a seawall absorbs storms, year after year, wearing down an inch at a time. One night, after dinner, he said, as gently as a man defusing a bomb, "Honey, maybe don't get too far ahead of this. The position isn't guaranteed. Anyone in the department could apply. I backed him up carefully from the far end of the table. Maybe wait until it's official before redoing the curriculum? She looked at us like we'd suggested the sun might not rise. Who, she asked, would dare? Who would possibly put themselves up against her? 9 years of seniority. A doctorate. A doctorate, she repeated, tapping the table. And Bethany and I did not look at each other because we both wrote that doctorate with our childhoods. She wasn't being defensive when she said no one would challenge her. That's what I need you to understand. She was being sincere. In the world she lives in, the one she has built and furnished and locked from the inside, the job was already hers, and the interview was a formality like signing for a package. What would you have done in this situation? Watching a parent sprint toward a cliff, knowing that every warning just makes them run faster. Let me know in the comments, because 4 years later, I still don't know if there was a version of that conversation that could have saved anyone. Now I need to introduce you to the other woman in this story, because she deserves better than to enter it as a plot twist. Her name is Rachel Moore. She's 41, and she'd been teaching in the English department at mom's school for exactly 1 year. I don't know Rachel deeply, but I know her the way you know good people at the edge of your life, by the small things that keep being true. She helped my sister Bethany prepare for speech competitions, staying after school on her own time, drilling her on pacing and eye contact, and Bethany came home glowing. She's quiet in the way that reads as calm rather than cold. And she is deeply woven into our church, because Rachel is married to Pastor Caleb, our church's pastor, who also happens to substitute teach at the same high school. Small towns are like this. Every rope is tied to every other rope, so when one person starts thrashing, the whole net moves. Rachel had tried to be friendly with my mother from her first week at the school. Warm hellos in the hallway. Little kindnesses. When I showed up at church alone, which was most Sundays by then, Rachel would always find me afterward and say, "Tell your mom hello for me." Every single time. And every single time, my mother received the greeting like junk mail. Never reciprocated. Never so much as a hello back down the wire. Here's what happened next, as best as anyone can reconstruct it. The principal approached Rachel. Not the other way around. The principal went to her and asked her to apply for the honors position. Sit with that. The principal, who by then had spent 8 years marinating in my mother's complaint emails, who had watched her burn through every friendship on that staff on a 12-month cycle, looked at the most coveted opening in the department, looked past the 9-year veteran with the doctorate who wanted it so badly she was already rewriting the curriculum, and walked down the hall to personally recruit the quiet first-year teacher instead. People talk about karma like it's lightning, sudden and dramatic. It's not. It's sediment. It settles silently, email by email, cruelty by cruelty, year after year, and then one day someone makes a quiet personnel decision and you realize the verdict was written long ago. They were just waiting for a place to publish it. Did Rachel know how badly my mother wanted that job when she said yes? I've turned that question over more times than I can count. My father thinks that if she knew applying was cruel, that a truly kind person steps aside from a colleague's dream. I love my dad, but I don't think I agree, and I've had to work out why. A job posting isn't a dream you can own. Wanting something for 9 years, loudly, at your own dinner table, does not put a fence around it. And there's a bleaker layer under that. My mother's wanting has never once been a reason for her to step aside from anything. She has taken and taken from everyone in this story. Her daughter's childhoods, Mrs. Prescott's curriculum, my father's spine, and the idea that the world owed her deference on top of it all is exactly the disease. Besides, in the end, the question is moot. Rachel applied, quietly, the way she does everything. No announcement, no campaign, just a name dropped into a folder next to my mother's. And that's when the machinery jammed in the most telling way possible. The decision was supposed to belong to one man, Mr. Whitfield, the head of the English department, 54 years old, a company lifer with a cardigan for every day of the week. And Mr. Whitfield took one look at the two names in that folder, my mother and Rachel, and noped out entirely. He went to the administration and asked for a committee to make the call instead. Think about what that means. Think about what it tells you when a department head with decades of experience refuses to personally choose between a first-year teacher and a 9-year veteran, and instead builds a bunker of shared responsibility around the decision. He knew that if his name was alone on that verdict, my mother would make the rest of his career a war. Everyone in that building had 8 years of data on exactly what she does to people who fail to hand her what she wants. A committee wasn't bureaucracy. It was a blast shield. Then came the waiting weeks, and honestly, they were their own kind of horror movie because my mother spent them happy. Radiantly, expansively happy, the Coronation Eve version of her, which is the version I trust least. She talked about repainting her new classroom. She debated which honors novels to cut and which to keep, red pen hovering over Mrs. Prescott's donated life's work like a general drawing on someone else's map. She called Mrs. Prescott almost nightly, mining her for more materials, more institutional secrets, more of the very generosity she'd spat on for 3 years. One night, I heard her tell my father, in that dreamy planning voice, that once she had the honors position, she was going to push the school to make her department head after Whitfield, climbing, in her head, a ladder whose first rung didn't exist yet. Dad just said, 26 years of marriage in a single syllable. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. We post new stories every day, because I promise you, the sound that dreamy voice made when it shattered is something I need you to hear all the way to the end. The committee reviewed both applicants. I don't know what happened in that room. I don't know what was said, what was weighed, whether my mother's 8-year paper trail of grievance emails sat in a folder on that table, or just in everyone's memory. I only know the output. They chose Rachel. I wasn't home when Mom got the news, and I have thanked God for that scheduling accident more than once. But I was home 90 minutes later, and I will describe the kitchen to you exactly as I found it, because I'll never forget it. Every cabinet door stood open. She does that when she rages, flings them open looking for nothing. A coffee mug in pieces in the sink, and my mother at the table, hair wild, laptop open, typing with her whole arms the way other people chop wood, reading her own sentences out loud in a voice I can only call a hiss. My father stood by the refrigerator with his hands loose at his sides, wearing the face of a man watching his house burn from inside it. She looked up at me and said, and this is close to verbatim, because some sentences tattoo themselves on you, a first-year teacher, a first-year nobody over me, 9 years, a doctorate. And I stood there with my keys still in my hand, thinking about being 11 years old, thinking about pedagogy and fake footnotes, thinking, whose doctorate, Mom? I didn't say it. You don't say things like that in that kitchen. But I thought it so loudly I was sure she could hear. What she did next, she did with the discipline of a woman who has been drafting complaint emails for 8 years and has finally found her masterpiece. She emailed the superintendent. She emailed the principal. She texted other teachers in the department, colleagues, people she'd need to face in the hallway for years, demanding they agree that she'd been robbed. The theory she assembled in real time was a full conspiracy. The school was plotting against her, had always been plotting against her. Rachel was a vindictive little schemer. The actual word she used is not one I'll repeat, who had wormed her way in and stolen a job she knew belonged to my mother. Not once in all the hours of raging I witnessed, did she entertain for a single second the idea that the committee had simply looked at both candidates and chosen. The world she lives in does not contain that possibility. In her world, she cannot lose fairly. Therefore, any loss is proof of a rigged game. It's airtight. It's unfalsifiable. It's the loneliest way to be alive that I can imagine, and she has never spent 1 hour imagining anything else. And then it got worse, because then she found the thread that connected the school to the church. Rachel is our pastor's wife. Pastor Caleb substitutes at the school. And so, in my mother's expanding conspiracy, Caleb was in on it too. Don't ask me the mechanism. There was never a mechanism. The theory needed him, so the theory absorbed him, which brought her, with the terrible logic of a landslide, to my father. Dad has been a deacon at our church for over a decade. That role is not a hobby dam. It is the load-bearing wall of who my father is, the quiet Sunday morning usefulness, the hospital visits, the widows whose gutters he cleans. And my mother stood in our kitchen and told him he had to resign. Not just resign as deacon, leave the church entirely, walk away from his whole community, because Rachel and Caleb went there, and she would not be married to a man who worshipped alongside her enemies. And if he refused, divorce. She said flat, like a policy. That's the scene I opened with, the one you dropped into at the beginning. 11 o'clock at night. A countdown to Sunday. 26 years of marriage held hostage over a ninth grade English position. My father didn't argue. He just got very still, the seawall taking one more winter, and said they'd talk when she calmed down. She informed him she had never been calmer in her life. The horrifying thing is that might have been true. I haven't told you much about my brother Micah, and I want to be careful with him because he's the most innocent person in this entire story. Micah is autistic, and this past year he's also been struggling with psychosis. A fragile season, medications being adjusted, reality already hard to hold on to with both hands. Micah needs the house to be predictable the way the rest of us need oxygen. And into his fragile season came weeks of our mother's rage. The shouting, the slammed doors, the venomous phone monologues that went on for hours. His mind, already struggling to sort signal from noise, did the only thing it could with the data. He became convinced that our mother is a demon, not as a figure of speech, as a fact about the world. I came home one evening and found him on the couch, rocking forward and back, whispering it to himself while in the next room, she raged into the phone at some poor colleague. And I sat down next to my little brother and I put my hand on his back, and I could not honestly tell him he was wrong about the important part. The clinical word and the ancient word were both just trying to name the same weather. Something lives in our house that hurts people and cannot be reasoned with. He rocked and she raged, and I sat between them in the wreckage of a family that a job posting didn't break. It just found the cracks that were already there and filled them with water. So I did the only thing left. I got out. These past weeks, I've been a ghost in my own home. Leaving early, coming back late, sleeping at Tyler's when it's bad, timing my showers and meals around her patrol routes like a prisoner who has memorized the guard's shifts. 21 years of training makes you good at it. I know the sound of her rage footsteps versus her normal footsteps. I know which floorboard hallway creaks to skip. Some nights I sit in my car in a grocery store parking lot with great expectations on the passenger seat. Mrs. Prescott's copy, the one she gave a sad 14-year-old who didn't yet know how much she needed. And I just breathe. And I think about Pip, who wanted so badly to rise above his station that he made himself sick with it, ashamed of everyone who ever loved him. She never read it, you know. 30 years of teaching English, a doctor on the wall, and I'd bet everything I own she never once read the book that's been sitting in her own department's curriculum this whole time, quietly explaining her to anyone who'd listen. Drop a comment below. Do you think they made the right call? The committee, I mean. A first-year teacher over a 9-year veteran with a doctorate. Because on paper, my mother wins that contest 10 times out of 10. And that's exactly the point. Nobody involved was reading the paper. They were reading 8 years of her. Here is my confession, the part I've circled this whole story. I know I'm supposed to feel bad for my mother. I've done the math on what a good daughter feels, and I know sympathy is supposed to be in the total. Her dream of 9 years died in a committee room, and she is in genuine agony. The agony is not fake, whatever else about her is. But I don't feel bad. I've searched every room of myself for the grief a daughter should have, and the rooms are empty, and I've stopped apologizing for the vacancy. Because here's what I know that her sympathy would require me to forget. She has spent years, decades, treating every person in her orbit as either a servant or an obstacle, as she built her entire life on the assumption that there would never be a bill. She hit her daughter and assumed there'd be no bill. She told me she wished I was dead and assumed there'd be no bill. She made children write her doctorate, cut down every friend on schedule, flooded her principal's inbox with 8 years of venom. No bill, no bill, no bill. And then one spring, a committee of ordinary people who had simply been paying attention quietly handed her the invoice. The school didn't plot against her. It remembered her. Those are different things, and the difference is the whole story. Maybe that makes me a jerk. My mother would certainly say so, and there are relatives who'd nod along. But I've noticed something about the people quickest to demand sympathy for her. None of them wrote her term papers at 11. None of them were banned from inviting their favorite teacher to their own graduation party. None of them developed a disorder with a name and a treatment plan just from growing up in cider weather. It's easy to prescribe grace from outside the blast radius. As of tonight, Rachel Moore is preparing to teach honors English in the fall, in the room where Mrs. Prescott once handed a sad kid a book about the cost of wanting. My father is still a deacon, quietly, stubbornly, and still married, though the countdown clock gets rewound and restarted every few days. Micah is slowly steadying, more so on the days she's out of the house. And my mother is still sending emails, still certain, still waiting for the world to admit its mistake. I don't think that admission is ever coming. Because the lesson underneath all of this, the one she'll never let herself learn, is brutally simple. Reputation is just consequence on a delay. Every unkindness is a seed, and you can plant them for years and years in what looks like perfect safety, right up until the season turns. My mother sowed for 2 decades and called the harvest a conspiracy. The rest of us just called it the fall. Guys, we are inching toward 1,000 subscribers on this channel. If you're not subscribed, please consider hitting subscribe. It really helps us hit that 1,000 milestone. Thanks for sticking around.